I've been watching a really interesting show called The Rookie, which is all about LAPD's rookies, and there are 3 of them in this particular show, and they are basically put to the test by their training officers and tested to the limit. Now, one of the tick boxes that each rookie needs to accomplish is passing through or crossing the boundary of ethical dilemma and deciding what to do in a situation where you are faced with an ethical dilemma. So this may not be a strictly speaking violation of the law, or it might be a violation of the law, but it was done in a situation where either somebody was super impoverished and couldn't afford to carry out what the law required them to carry out, or it might be an ethical consideration where you were helping somebody who was very poor and was unable to help themselves, or it could be something where you're helping a whole community of people who cannot reach a particular outcome without your help, but the way you're helping them has an ethical boundary. Ethics and law are quite closely related. When we look for jobs in companies, we often look at the ethics of the managers involved or the ethic of the owner, whether the owner has been brought out on any corruption charges in the past, and whether the owner and the managers and the people who run the company have a squeaky clean record. So we know that 73% of people who apply for positions do look at ethics of a company and do look at how the moral fiber of a company may be perceived before they join that company. But we have also seen ethics and corporations clash on many occasions. I mean, the biggest example I can give you is that of Enron, where it not only brought Enron down, it also brought down a very reputable and very arguably very powerful audit firm called Arthur Andersen, if you can remember. And that was all about sort of the ethical boundaries about how Enron was reporting on certain matters concerning its profitability and an analysis of all of that. So you can see that ethics and law, whilst they're very closely related, have very, very different animals and creatures. And it's often very difficult to point out or find an ethical aspect that you need to cross over, because obviously you don't want to break the law. So what I'm really trying to say is I have a client who wanted me to write child labor undertakings because he knew that some of the factories he was dealing with for the supply of his products were using child labor. But on the other hand, there could be a number of people who turn a blind eye to it because, say, for example, they're at a family wedding and they know that a lot of people working at the family wedding are minors and they shouldn't be there, or that's a violation of the law, but they're being asked to turn a blind eye to this in view of the fact that it's a family wedding. So there's an ethical consideration again. Should I report this? Am I going to be looked down upon by my family as being, somebody who does not value family values? But on the other hand, I have my job and this is crossing the boundary. There shouldn't be minors in this workplace. So as you can see, ethics and business and law are all very closely related. And we have to be really, really mindful of the connotations when we enter into that gray area. Sometimes we may not realize we're in a gray area and we may end up crossing the ethical boundary. So I generally try and say to people who ask me this question, I kind of create a checklist, or I have maybe 3 points that I would say are quite important to remember in this context. So I relate these 3 things in a corporate context because obviously there are many gray areas of ethics in AI. There are many gray areas of ethics from an environmental perspective. There might also be many gray areas obviously from an employment and an employee relationship perspective. But I guess the first thing I would say is think of what's happened and think of any other experiences that you've been involved with and see how that issue was handled. Because remember, it's not going to be black and white, it's going to be very gray and it's going to drive you crazy. And the second aspect I would say is relate your actions to your company's values and mission. So what does your company stand for? What is your corporate profile? How has the corporation trained you to act? Because often you would be able to recognize ethical boundaries have been crossed when you know that this is the ethos of your company and this is what your company stands up for. For example, the child labor undertaking, as I mentioned to you, the company in question was under no illusions about their suppliers, and they wanted to ensure that they were never ever branded as a company that bought things from suppliers that used child labor, and there was no black and white to it. So they investigated everyone, they made sure they signed the undertakings, and they took a very hardline policy on this, which we all very much respected. And so there you go. Sometimes your guidance can come from the fact that your company has a particular mannerism and manner in which they deal with certain ethical issues. So that would be my number 2. And my number 3 would be generally act with integrity. When you know you have to make a decision on something, or when you know you're being put in a situation where you might again be in the gray zone, you need to look and you need to evaluate the situation. You need to see who you might be affecting and how your actions or another person's actions might affect them, and how that ethical dilemma might play out if you were to act on it, or you were to acknowledge it, or you were to report it, whichever the case may be. And you sort of reach that conclusion on that basis. So that would be my number 3, where you basically emphasize integrity at all aspects, and at all points you act with utmost integrity. That's my ethical talk for the week from Think Tank. Thank you for listening.